Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast, the podcast for special educational needs and disability. Each week on the Sencast, we talk about a different topic within the world of SEND to improve our knowledge, to provide support to professionals working in schools, and to empower parents. In this episode, we discuss the Assess, Plan, Do, Review, or APDR cycle and why it matters. And this can be seen as a negative thing, lots of paperwork, but it shouldn't be. It should be a positive thing to support pupils. And this was discussed with this week's guest, that is Sara Alston, a SEND and safeguarding consultant and trainer. And Sara has 38 years experience as a teacher, school leader, SENCO, and now as an independent consultant. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared, and we help to show the small sets of progress pupils with SEND can make. And we can do this for a wide range of abilities and ages, and we have frameworks to suit students from birth with our early years all the way up to 25 with our Steps for Life framework. And that covers the functional academic skills, employability skills, and all the independent living skills. And at the other end of the spectrum, for our most complex learners working within the engagement model, we have our engagement steps to build really good understanding of the people's needs, what they can do, and show that progress that they are making. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. Now, let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing why does the Assess, Plan, Do, Review, or APDR cycle matter? My guest is Sara Alston, a SEND and safeguarding consultant and trainer. Sara has 38 years experience as a teacher, school leader, SENCO, and now as an independent consultant. And Sara is also the co-author of The Inclusive Classroom, A New Approach to Differentiation, and author of Working Effectively with Your TA. She also writes for a variety of magazines. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
You are welcome. So APDR came in 10 years ago with the SEN Code of Practice.
Yeah, I'm just sort of slightly having my mind blown by the fact it's 10 years, but we'll go with that one.
It is. It's one of the things that recently came in. You're like, oh no, it didn't.
Isn't recent. No, you'd have thought we'd have been better at it by now.
No comment. I often feel that the APDR cycle is seen as a burden by schools, not a positive process that supports best practice.
I think the problem is that we have got obsessed by the paperwork, and the paperwork has become separated from actually what we're doing. So we end up doing the same thing twice because we're not actually linking in we have the SEN paperwork, whatever we call it, and we have, we know for EHCPs, and I almost want to take those children, because we know we do, and that to some extent with the annual review, we have something statutory. It's the particularly the children at SEND support, who get kind of lost in this process because we get so caught up, we've got to produce. And we stopped calling them IEPs, so we started calling them SEND support plans, individual support plans. We have no consistency about the language, which makes life difficult. But we have these, and they've got to be reviewed at least 3 times a year. And I get reports from the EPs who say every 6 weeks, and you've grown, and that becomes overwhelming.
Yes.
And actually, we lose the link to actually what the practice is.
We do. And also, don't people really actually think about each stage and what it means?
We lose the links between the stages. So we have assessments, and there's a whole discussion I think we'll hopefully have about what do you mean by an assessment.
Yep.
That happens in one corner, often by one set of people. And I'm amazed when I go into schools and there's just no link between the assessments and the plan. You have a plan, which is often prepared by one group of people and may not actually be seen by the people working in the classroom implementing it. We have what people are doing in the classroom. And one of the things schools are appallingly bad at is and I think, it's getting on my soapbox a bit. As a country, we tend to be very good at identifying a problem. We're very bad at actually doing and implementing. What we're really bad at is reviewing what we implemented. And that bit gets lost. And so we've got each part of the process becoming separate. Rather than a cycle, they become individual tasks.
Yes. And it starts with that assessment.
Mm.
And I've obviously at B Squared, we do assessment. So it's going to be my favourite area, obviously. But it is my favourite area. But it's also the one I feel is the most lacking in most schools, because either they do not do any real assessment apart from a child is struggling with writing.
What does that mean? But the answer, what's so frustrating is actually, if we stop, we know what a child is struggling by. The number of times working, you get that classic line, they're working below age expectation. What the earth does that mean? Does that mean they are working within year group but not achieve what we want yet? Or are they working 4 or 5 years behind? Or are they not able to write at all? What does, that working below doesn't tell me how much.
No.
Even if then somebody has actually said, they're in year 5, they're working at year 3. What can they do and what can't they do? What are the issues? So we need to know, we need to know how much. We need to know where they are. And it's the why question. And it's this thing of stating the problem. They're working 2 years below age expectation. Why? And that's where we often get the separation between the assessments and actually planning anything. Because often the assessments are happening in schools. They may not be the right assessment. So we were all year 5, therefore we will sit the year 5 assessment, whether we can access it or not. And then we wonder why the child cries and doesn't want to come into school. Well, there may be a link there. But we so often we have the information. And even if they said, we're not doing we haven't got a formal assessment, we've got professionals. They've made observations. They know what's going on. Actually, you say, here's, Millie's work. What is the issue? Well, actually, she really struggles with the physical act of handwriting. We've then got something we can plan from.
Exactly. And it's like struggle with writing. It's like, which part?
Mm.
And also, I always one I see a lot in social media is, can anyone recommend a year 3 writing intervention?
For what?
And I went, right, is that a child in year 3?
Yeah.
Working at year 3? I do not know. Writing intervention, is it the physical? Is it the composition? Is it the structure? Is it the spelling? Is it the grammar?
Is it the coherence?
Do they just do not like writing? What equipment are they using? Are they using there are so many and I see a lot of things, that's their level of assessment. And it's, as you said, actually, a lot more. Professionals use that information.
And actually, on an informal basis, teachers are using that information in their classrooms. What they're not doing is linking it to the assess plan, do, review cycle.
Yes.
So I go into schools and I see there are lots of assessments happening. And so, classic example, I went into a school some weeks ago where they did a reading assessment, which gave a reading age. So they recorded all the reading ages for the children. For those children who had a reading age below X, they did additional phonics. This is a secondary school. There was no assessment as to whether the difficulty with reading was phonics, whether that, what was no looking to see what had been done previously, and actually whether they had been failing on phonics since they were 5, at which point, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again when you know it doesn't work. So let's try something else. But they just took that. I mean, what was really frustrating was the assessments they were using gave a whole raft of information.
Which was ignored.
They didn't even know it was there. All they took was that headline figure and made assumptions. So they hadn't completed an assessment, but they had not made an assessment. They'd gone through an action, but they hadn't, yes, tick box, child had done a reading assessment. But actually, nobody had engaged intellectually with it as to what was the issue.
Yes. There is, and I will try and find a link. It disappears and reappears, but there is a document, I think, by Hertfordshire Local Authorities EdPsych Service on the APDR cycle. It is, I think, 70 pages long. 63 pages are on assessment.
But that in itself is, and I know this is unfair. I'm coming on to a podcast with an assessment company, but we need to make sure that we don't just assess.
But with the assessment, the reason there are so many pages is there is the cognition and learning. There's all the academic stuff. But then there's all the other areas that actually, they're struggling with reading. Okay, but why is that? Is it something going on? There's all the other stuff going on, and it helps people see the range of assessments that you can do.
And what's important with that range of assessments is we don't lose our expertise, our professionalism as staff. And when I say staff, because I mean staff, not because it's not just teachers, we need to listen. So often the person who is hearing children read is a teaching assistant.
Yeah.
What do they know about what? They may know that child will settle to read after they had a walk around the playground. They may know the only way they're going to get that child to read is if they offer them a sticker.
They may also know that when you've got this plan, they look at it and go, but they can do that.
Because nobody's asked them. And we then get to the whole thing of when we do assessment, what can they do one-to-one and what can they do in a big classroom? What can they do that thing that drives schools, man, when the parent comes in and said, but they can do that at home. Yes. Rather than we need to go from the default of doubting the parent to actually, so they can do it at home. What is it that means they can do it at home? Is it that actually they can do their tables because their parents tell them the answer? Or is it because it's quiet, calm, they feel comfortable, they're sat in their pajamas, they've got their teddy bear, and all those other things that mean they are calm and their brain is free to actually do their times tables?
Yes.
And we may not be able to replicate that in school, but to know that knowledge is in there, but we need to find a way of getting it out, it's a different question to them not being able to do it.
And it will have a complete impact on the things you're trying to do when they get frustrated because they can actually do it. They just don't want to show it. It just makes it much more. Yes. The phrase choose not to is not a conscious one. It's a safety one.
Yeah. But we need to go to they can't, not they won't.
Yes. Yes. It's that such simple changes in language have a big difference.
And, this whole thing of moving staff when they discuss behaviour from won't to can't.
Yes.
And it's really important. But that may be another discussion for another day.
Yes. So, should we move on to plan or not yet?
I think, let's see, I'm just thinking, I think we talked about, the fact that assessment needs to be a broad thing. And the other thing I think very quickly saying that assessments need to move for children as we move up through the SEN scale need to move beyond diagnosis. The great drive, we have a diagnosis, that will solve the problem. It changes nothing. The thing that makes a difference with a diagnosis is the response we give to it. And we have the whole issue, you give a child a label that tells us it, if we say child has autism, that's a bit like saying they're a bird. Doesn't tell us whether we've got an ostrich, a penguin, or an eagle. It just tells us they've got feathers. And we need to look at the need of the child. And so often I get to schools and they say, the child has got a diagnosis of this. Therefore, we will do this, 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 and this. Because that's what our assessment is. Our assessment needs to be about the child. And of course, within that is the whole question of the quality of some of those assessment reports.
Yes.
And we need to it's a bit like the sat nav. We've got the sat nav on and it tells us to go take, in my case, living where I do, it tells me to go on the M25. I need, that because that's its assessment, that the route is the M25, because that's easy for it. Actually, 9 times out of 10, I live here. My knowledge of the local situation, child, is that the M25 is the last place I want to go because I'll hit a traffic jam. So we need to make sure we use our knowledge of the child stroke route and are not disempowered by the reports and assessments we get. So we lose that sight.
So it's interesting you mentioned sat-nav, and this is an important bit that I often relate with the APDR cycle is, let's say, getting somewhere is basically what we're trying to achieve.
Yes, we're getting a route to educational progress or welfare progress.
So I will get you to write a nice, simple turn left, turn right route from your house to Heathrow Airport. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask on social media, does anyone know how to get to Heathrow Airport? You will give me your list of directions and I will then just follow your directions. I will not end up at Heathrow Airport.
Yeah.
So something working in one place, a plan is based on their assessments. And in some ways, that, as you said, that wider assessment of where are we, what can we do, that sort of assessment, and then using that with a plan helps us work out if that's going to work.
And we need to remember the assessment needs to include a why question. So, plan.
So with the plan, and the bit I see quite a bit, if you are going to use an intervention and it tells you needs to be done twice a week for 6 months, that is what you do. If you can't do that, do something else, because that intervention is successful if you do it twice a week for 6 months.
And this is one of the real difficulties, in my view. I mean, I think there's a stage going back, but let's pick on that one first. With things like the Education Endowment Foundation's work, which is really, really useful about the impact of different interventions. However, very rarely do schools manage to follow an intervention according to all the details on the packet, because people are ill. The fire alarm goes off. Staff get pulled to do something else. Schools, unfortunately, we have lots and lots of timetables, but they're not predictable settings. And to follow something according to the box is really hard. I mean, I always think of the Monopoly, the game Monopoly. It has a set of rules, which should be how Monopoly is played. One of the things, if you ever play Monopoly with any member of a different family to your own, everybody has their own variations on those rules. And it's not because they didn't at heart start with the rules. There's probably nobody in the current generations have ever read them because they always learnt them from somebody else, which again happens with interventions, that the person who is now delivering it has been trained by the person who delivered it before, and they have the Monopoly rules have changed. And I think we need to be aware that impacts that impacts the impact. So I know the two impacts in that sentence, but I think we can live with it, hopefully. It affects the impact of an intervention. And we need to be clear. I mean, we're almost gone when we're talking about interventions to the do.
But no, it's the intent. So there are times when they go, we can't do that often. We haven't got the staff, so we'll just do it this often. As soon as you've planned it less, you're done for. Because even as you said, even that won't get done at that level.
And we are, but also it's the thing, that you have a intervention, Nellie does amazing stuff, really good intervention, but it's supposed to be for this group of children. Most schools use it for this group of children. And we'll just slip so-and-so in as well. And that impacts. Or we don't, it's supposed to be in groups of 4, and we have 3 children who fit that group and 1 who fits that group, so we'll put them in as well. So we need to be, that all impacts. So when we make our plan, it needs to be realistic. We need to take the information from our assessments, including our knowledge of the child, not just a bit of paper. And one of the things that worries me when I go into schools is when the assess plan do cycle is we have a class teacher who is managing the assessments. And we often have academic assessments that are happening over one side, and the plan is actually being put together by Senko, who doesn't have access to the classroom observations, may not even have access to all the academic assessments that have taken place. We need that, if the assess plan is going to work, it needs input from the plan, needs input from all the people who have information about the child, including the child. Because actually, even our 4 or 5-year-olds will tell us is if we, what they may say is, I want to be better at numbers. I like tractors. Actually, I like tractors is a really important bit of information because one of their motivators, is tractors. So let's use tractors.
Get that engagement in, boost that kind of interest in what you're doing, getting those tractors in.
And we need to have that plan on, what can they do and what can't they do, but why? That why question. And the plan has got to be realistic. What can we actually do? And there's a whole side issue about what plans we may need to produce in order, when we have a high concern about a child, to make an EHCP application.
We'll come back to that a bit later.
I think, yeah.
But I think with the plan is you don't choose the intervention you're going to do and then do the plan. The plan is choosing which interventions. If you're going, it's that intervention, it's really successful, we need to do that, well, we can't. What are the other options?
But also, so often we go, they have reading difficulties, we do this. And so we actually start our plan with the menu of interventions we offer rather than what is the need of the child.
Yes.
And, we've got, Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown is really good at doing whatever it is. Therefore, we will ask Mrs. Brown to do that. And we have the one size fits all. If it's back to the bird thing. This is a bird, therefore it flies. Actually, if it's a penguin or an ostrich, it doesn't. So actually, the flight lessons are going to be, or the lessons on getting out, leaving a nest by flying are not appropriate for those birds. And we have a view of, this is maths, we do this. We do it. It's, the whole thing of, we get frustration with CAMS so often. We are going to do a talking therapy. We have a child with speech and language or communication needs who can't speak or won't engage with strangers. So we put them in a talking therapy. They do not engage. We close the therapy. No change has been made. And the blame is almost put on the child for not engaging in something that wasn't appropriate.
Went through the whole social stories about what to do when you're lost and things like that, and go talk to a police officer and all this stuff. And he knows every single answer. He will never talk to a stranger. So yes, he can go through that social stories. And they went, yes, he's got it now. It's like, he's never going to do it. You haven't actually addressed the difficulty.
Little boy who, one of those children will always be in my heart. Little boy with significant ADHD, attachment issues, a lot of real concerns about internet safety. Sat in a classroom, sat in my office. He was your guru on internet safety. He could tell you absolutely everything you wanted to know. But his impulsivity and his desire to connect with other people meant, on his own, with his computer, he could not apply any of that knowledge. And there's a real issue which we'll come into with the do about what children can do in one setting but can't do in another. And actually, a skill is not embedded unless you can apply it across a range of settings. And also, and this whole thing of teaching something that depends on a skill they don't have. And we often teach comprehension things, but don't give the children the abilities to skim and scan text. So they know what they should be asking themselves about a text, but they don't have the pre-skill.
Yes. But as you said, with reading, there's so many things. We've done podcasts and all the different things that get you to reading. And you said assumption is phonics, or assumption is something else. And it is that assessment really should help your plan in your interventions, really narrow them down. And as you said, even identify that all the stuff you're currently offering isn't suitable. We need to find a new one.
And it's also that whole thing of a word, intervention. We make assumption. I mean, this is the heart of the book, The Inclusive Classroom. We make an assumption that an intervention is something that happens outside of a classroom, often with an additional adult. Actually, we know every interaction is an intervention. And we need to be much more focused on what we can provide within the classroom. The reality is, the budget for teaching assistants is not there. The reality is the recruitment crisis for teaching assistants is huge. We actually need to think what interventions, in inverted commas, doing the little air things on a podcast because they can't be seen, but what interventions we're actually using, and one of the things is making sure our plan actually includes interventions we're doing all the time. Another child who I'll always go back to, little boy who really, really struggled with writing for all sorts of reasons. Incredibly able child, but he just had such high anxiety about writing. One of the things that worked for him to help him to write was you physically took the pencil and you put it in his hand. You did not ask him ever to look for a pencil, even on his own table. You put it in his hand. He was then more likely to write. That was an intervention. This little boy ended up with an EHCP, but we ended up with a vast plan, because in order to prove the level of support he needed, we had to write down all these hundreds of tiny, tiny tweaks we were doing throughout the day, all of which on their own took milliseconds. But A, you had to remember to do them, and B, you needed, actually, the teacher could not, always be there to put the pencil in his hand, to turn the page.
segueing a bit, but that bit about all that stuff you learn about that child over the year that makes a really big difference, that needs to be passed on to the next teacher.
Which is why you need the plan, because actually so much, and that's why your plan needs to be shared, because it's no good having a plan that sits on the Senko's drive that is summarized into a passport that is on the teacher's drive and might be printed out and put in a folder that the TA doesn't open. It's the whole thing that by writing it down, it is passed into people's memory. We need to actually have working documents, and they need to be seen, and all the people concerned need to contribute. Because actually, with this little boy, it was the TA in the classroom, we're lucky enough to have one, who spotted as she gave him the pencil he could write. And we were able to, the whole lot of things we could put in place for him that made a difference. I mean, it says, probably worth telling as a story about this child. One of the other things that made him, that we noticed when we kept our records, was his anxiety rose towards lunchtime. Okay, so we introduced snacks. Was he hungry? That helped, but it still was anxiety. When we talked to him and we talked to his mum, he was very limited diet. He's also celiac. And so had not only limited diet, but fear about what eating certain things with it was going to make him feel unwell. So we discovered that actually the only thing he really ate on the school menu was a jacket potato. So one of his anxieties as we approached lunchtime was, would there be a jacket potato? So we assured him there would always be a jacket potato. We then realised that had helped but wasn't helping enough. So we talked to him. What he wanted to know was make sure there was a jacket potato. So we ended up with starting each day, was he'd go to the school kitchen, see the cook, select his potato, which was then put on its own little tray with his name on it, and he knew his jacket potato would be there at lunchtime. Reduced his anxiety and increased his ability to engage during the whole morning hugely. And can I say, absolute hats off to the secondary school who managed to continue that practice.
It sounds like a really small thing.
But it was huge.
And it sounds like, well, they're not going to have that in their work life. Well, yes, they are, because they're going to make their own lunch and choose their own lunch. In a school, you either take your own lunch in, but you don't have that choice. There's so many things. But also, as you get older, you'll cope. So it's one of those adjustments and adaptations.
It's a reasonable adjustment.
And it's not one that's going to fail him late. It's actually, he will find his own way, but he will have so many choices outside of school. Also, all school holidays, he eats exactly what he wants.
And it was just developing that. But that was a plan. And then convincing the local authority that was actually that is now written into his EHCP. Because that's what that child needed. And that was, yes, we know at one level his diagnosis said he was autistic and he had restricted food choices. There was a medical diagnosis that said he had celiac. That was it, what the plan and the do looked like was choosing jacket potatoes.
So we're moving on to the do.
Yes. I think that's probably fair. Let's move to do.
And it's got to start with is you've got to do what you've said. Let's just start on that bit.
Yeah.
And be honest about that.
Yeah. And one of the issues is we're going back to plans, going back to the EHCP request thing, is we end up writing down doing things we're not doing because we can't do. Yeah. And we need to be clear what would we like to be able to do and what realistically can we do. And it's a whole thing about what is within our quality first teaching, ordinarily available, whatever we're calling it this week. in education, we rebrand our language on such regularity. I mean, when Daniel and Isabella and I wrote the inclusive classroom, we should have called it adaptive teaching. We missed the wave and called it a new approach to differentiation. It's not what you call it. It's what you do. And what the do has got to be. What do we do? And what needs to be clear is we need to adapt it as we go. I'll go back to the little boy and the potato. Knowing us telling him it was a potato wasn't enough. We needed to adapt it to him choosing the potato.
And I'm not going to say that was APDR inception, where you did the APDR with a little bit of APDR with another little bit of APDR, and then went back to that. But that's what you did.
And too often, once we're written down, we've done our assessment, we've put in our plan, and our do is set in mud, set on stone, until we have the next review. And I think it's really important is these are working documents. And what we do, a colleague, lovely bit of adaptation. The plan said that for this child to support them to construct a sentence, they would do oral rehearsal of the sentence. They would count the words in the sentence. They would speak it again. They would put down a counter for each word so they knew that they got the word. She found the child was missing out the full stop. She got a dice, put it with the 1, so it looked like a full stop, at the end of the set of counters. They started adding full stops. But that little bit of adaptation, what was the trouble? What was the thing? Was they couldn't remember the whole sentence. They were struggling. What strategies could we put in? Here we're doing it. Actually, we're adapting it as we do it and adding the dice.
And the adaptation, there was a bit of assessment. Then she, what can I do? She planned. Then she did it. And she went, it's working. Okay. APDR, when I say APDR, sir.
It's there, but it's not. But what was really important was she recorded on the assessment, on the plan, I've added a dice. And then at Senko, when we were reviewing the plan, I went, you added a dice? Talk to me. I have no idea what that means. She knew, that other people's staff working in her classroom knew. But what we were then able to do was write it into the plan, that institutional memory, to going up into the next year group. As the child got more independent, in fact, the bit they kept was they, stopped having to orally rehearse. They stopped having to count this. But one of the things they did like was a dice on their table during writing sessions to remind them about full stops.
Simple.
It was, yes, you can have a dice, but for somebody who didn't see the plan and know that was the history.
I think with do is quite a simple bit. It is, this is what you're doing, do it. But it's that kind of, and I don't want to say making notes. I don't want to say recording everything. But as you said, kind of keep in mind, what have we changed? What was the initial aim? How did we tweak it? And that should be recorded and shared. But I don't want to say it should be burdensome because we don't want to be killed by the paperwork.
It's got to be working. I mean, ideally we are paper free, but I have of years of working in schools actually printing out the plans and people scribbling on them. Literally, so you got the Post-its, stick a Post-it on it. And you used to love it when, as a Senko, staff came to review support plans and they were covered in Post-its. And we'd have to peel them off and try and work out which belonged to which. But it showed they were working documents and they were being used and people had seen them. But I think with the do, it is about the honesty, about what can we do. Don't pretend we did that intervention if it didn't happen. And there's a whole thing about how we record interventions that are outside of the classroom or outside of the normal provision.
And there is a big difference between doing the intervention and it not working and not doing the intervention and it not working. It will lead to different next steps. And I think being honest that you didn't do it, the question will then be the why. And then when you have that conversation, things can change so you can. But if you pretend you did to make people happy.
And can I say the absolute, write down whether if you're running an intervention out to the classroom, was the child there? This child has not made progress in the intervention, but nobody's written down the fact they were absent. In fact, it clashed with their OT appointment.
Yes.
And I think, or being honest, actually, we ended up holding the intervention in a corridor. And yes, it was happening. Yes, the children were there, but the place meant they were completely and utterly distracted.
But all of that information will help you tweak and improve and refine, rather than saying, oh, we did it, everything was rosy, but he didn't make progress. It's
why? It's that why question. It's that professional curiosity. Why? The assessment. Why is this assessment a plan? It's almost a how are we going to make it work? But why are we doing it?
Yes.
With the do. Why is this working? Why is it not? And when we're coming on to the review, it's this why question. And it's professional curiosity. And that's what makes teachers, is the professional curiosity. Why is this working for a child? Why isn't it? Why is my teaching having an impact? Why is my teaching not having an impact?
Now, before we move on to the review, the bit I want to discuss about the bit I hate about is teachers or schools who feel that almost the do is the only right part. You've got to be doing something. And you see on social media the way people ask questions like anyone got a year 3 writing intervention, someone will recommend one, they'll dive straight in. They haven't assessed. They haven't planned. They are rushing into the do. Same way they did the test, they didn't use the assessment, they didn't plan, they just did phonics because the children in secondary weren't reading or struggled with. Rushing into do can mean you're literally wasting an entire term or longer of somebody's time. And wasting someone's time as a professional isn't great, but you're failing that child.
And we shouldn't be doing the other thing, is being prepared to say, because it is, I get EHCPs and something's been written down to be done on the EHCP. We may need to say why we're not doing it. Had a big discussion yesterday. It said, when we had to really read the small print of this EHCP, it said a circle of friends intervention. Mum had Googled circle of friends, found the circle of friends intervention, and wanted to know why we were not doing it.
But it was
which saved us. Which saved us. But the intervention would not have been appropriate to that child, that setting, that time in that setting. A intervention working with a circle of friends to extend their social group was. And we need to be careful. Very often things come out from local authorities, you will do. And it's something somebody has Googled. They don't know the child. They don't know the setting. And we need to actually, when we said do, why are we doing it? What do we want from it? Why do we think it's going to work and make a difference? Having the courage to say, actually, we don't think it's working. But equally, we need to remember things take time. And, I can think of so many times when I've worked with teachers and with parents and, I said, why don't we try this? And they come back to me and go, it hasn't worked. Well, how often have you done it? Once. And they didn't like it. Well, we need a little bit of persistence, but it's that balance.
Yes. I think you can always tell those why is if you have that, you're doing that APDR and you are going, why are you doing this intervention? And they go, oh, they struggle with reading. You haven't assessed and you haven't planned. if you're doing this intervention, well, when we did this, we identified this, we really struggle with this. So this intervention really supports this, and we're doing it this, and although we're doing it this way, but it's that as soon as you start getting that length answer, you know they've done the assessment and they've done the plan and they're thinking about the doing.
And it's that thought process. And one of the things that I think is really difficult in secondary schools, and I think we need to be absolutely clear, secondary schools really difficult to do because you've got so many people involved. And go back to that, putting a pencil in the child's hand. For that to be consistent across a secondary school, that is really hard.
Secondary SEN is the hardest because you talked about earlier about putting the plan on the Senko share. I know secondary schools where Senkos will go, oh yeah, I've got all the child's plans on the staff share, just look at them. And then you go in there and there's just a list of all of them. You're going, well, which ones am I teaching? I've now got to cross-reference my registers for all my classes. It's not, there's so much work they've got to do and it is really hard, but there's got to be an easier, there's got to be a more supportive way of doing all that.
And, that a lot of that is about actually giving people time to read because it's a priority. And also not just giving the time, one thing, to read the plans at the beginning of the year when you don't know the children, because you won't remember.
No.
Particularly if you're not taught that child before. School, lovely school, give all the teachers teaching year 7 chance to read the incoming plans come from the primary schools. Well, a lot of it's not relevant because it's a different setting. They're inconsistent in their presentation because they're different schools, which whole issue. And they don't know the children. So you need it some way into the term. It's one of the reasons I would always argue that the assess plan if you're doing the 3 yearly review, you do October, February and May, June, not September, January, July, so that you're not writing about children you don't know.
Yes.
You have to know the child because otherwise it is just a bit of paper or a file because it doesn't feel relevant. And one of the ways you make it support secondary schools is you make it relevant. And it's how does it impact your teaching? What do you need to do? You need to give this child a pencil. Why? Because it is easier for them to write. Probably the PE teacher won't need to know that. But the PE teacher will need to know that getting changed, they need to be in a corner of the changing room away from anybody else so that it's quiet. Or they may even that they need to change in a toilet. But actually, if you're teaching them English, you probably don't need that bit of information.
Let's move on to review. Which, to me, the do is the simple part. It's the easy part in reality in terms of everything. It's the bit which takes that constant effort. But the review, again, you've now got to be really honest.
You've got to be honest and you've got to listen. Because actually, there are a range of people who will have views on it. And I am not, I'm realistic. I know that for 90% of cases, I'm not going to get the view of the parent. Yep. I mean, I always will go back to when my elder son was at secondary school. They sent out his IEP, as it was at that point, and they'd got new electronic software. Halfway down, the first target, the name and the information was relevant to my child. Half the way down, it clearly started talking about a completely different child. I rang the Senko, who was normally apologetic. She then, bless her, rang me a couple of days later. I did know her professionally as well, and said, our software had bleeped, and every single one we sent out had the right first target, and the remaining targets were for a sample child and weren't relevant to anyone. She said,
better than the alternative, it was a different child.
Yeah. But of the however many hundred plans they set out, the only parent who noticed was me. Or noticed and contacted them. I am realistic that, we share the information with parents. We try and engage them, and we should. And it's important that we listen to their voice if they're willing and able to share it. But, I'm aware that may be a silent partner.
The big thing I'm going to say on the review is, and obviously as an assessment company, we're always looking for progress, however small.
Yeah.
But you may not see progress instantly. If you're changing engagement, if you're changing attitudes, if you're changing things and you're learning, it's going to be compound progress. It's going to build up over time. Sometimes at that review process, we're looking for someone to say, oh, they're more engaged in the classroom. They're starting to write more. They want to. That is progress. It doesn't have to be a graph. Comments is qualitative data.
And small step progress. These things, do not happen overnight. And we want, it goes back to as it rightly should, to the assessment. They're working below. How much are they working below? Well, they're working, actually, they're working in year 3, in year 5, year 7, year 11. But we need to actually know what that looks like and then manage this little bit. They could read 50 common exception words. They can now read 55. Hopefully you have the best. We've got to be aware the impact may be small and it may not be what we expect. I mean, a fascinating bit for going back into time. I feel I need the cloudy wavy bit. Exactly. Every child counts, I think it was called. It's a one-to-one maths tutoring intervention. And it had hugely high impact in the short term on the children's maths. 6 months on, the impact was less good. When I was looking at the data and I'm thinking, they're not maintaining the impact. What I did look at, and I found as a consistent pattern, was the children who'd done that maths intervention, we were seeing an increase in their literacy scores. And that maintained. Because what was one of the things was they were gaining the confidence and the working to one and one-to-one, and they were gaining that metacognition of how they learnt. And though the recall of maths things was not necessarily maintaining, it was impacting on their work in other areas. And we need to be aware that when we do our assessment, and actually, we're not seeing an improvement in maths, but we're seeing an improvement in their engagement. We're seeing an improvement in their willingness to come into school. And I think that's really important. We're unaware with interventions, the impact, maybe an impact, but it's a bit like when you press something and that causes a bubble somewhere else.
Yes.
And it may be not what we think.
No, but it is. You don't have to have a graph. You don't have to have a percentage increase. You do not have to have anything like that.
It's going back to the whole thing. What do we know? The assessment, because action is, we start with an assessment. Our review is what do we know? And actually, that may be soft data.
Yes.
And that's why the voice of the teacher, the TA, is really important.
And if we think about being in a classroom, there's lots going on. You have parents who just say, I want my child to have a friend. Now, if you're doing that intervention and it's a group of 4, and actually when there's just 4 of them, they're actually more engaging, they're actually making friends, then yes, they may not have made as much progress we wanted with Nelly or something else. Actually, they've started a friendship and they want that person to come over. To the parent, that's going to be amazing. And it might have been the aim of the intervention, but it's probably an aim somewhere else that you're trying to achieve that. But should you stop that intervention?
That is a really difficult one. And it's thinking, what do we want from it? What do we want? And let's be honest, working in schools, what is practical? Is it practical to continue that intervention? Because actually we're seeing it's not having the impact on their literacy, their numeracy, but it is supporting their friendships.
So can we take that information and try and do more small group work and put that person with that child? It's you learn, and that will build.
And it's that flexible thinking. And that is really hard in schools because we really struggle with time, and we struggle with finance, and we struggle with staffing. And space. I would actually say we're talking interventions outside school, outside of the classroom. As someone who has taught some of the most vulnerable children in the school in corridors, cloakrooms, sitting on hall floors, we need to be realistic about what we can achieve. And that's important as well. And actually saying, what have we achieved? And one of the things about is celebrating the small successes. That working, supporting a primary AP at the moment. And one of the children, when I went in the other day, said hello. They looked, they recognised me, and they said hello. They then ran. But for that child, they'd seen me around, and I was beginning to become an adult, but I was not a trusted adult, and they engaged with me. And that needed, one of the things we're working on with that setting is actually having a sheet of paper where we write down the small successes. So-and-so said hello, because otherwise in the melee, we lose that assessment.
And I think, as we've said all along, with that review, you've got to be honest. It's not a finger-pointing exercise. It's not, we said we were going to do this and we didn't achieve it, and then let's hide that. It's be honest. Be honest, we aimed to do this, but we didn't.
We aimed to do it and we didn't, and work out why, what can we learn. But also, we tried this and it hasn't had the impact we wanted. And actually, we then have to make a decision. As I said before, definition of madness is continuing something without the impact. And, that whole thing of, secondary schools and phonics, actually, we tried giving them additional phonics. It's not impacting that. And we also need to be clear, is it having a negative impact? Actually, we made them do phonics again and we'll switch them off reading. And, if we've got something which is not working, and don't just say, we're reviewing on the 29th of January, therefore we will review on the 29th of January. We can review early. And actually, one of those things, we need to be clear that those dates we have for reviews and that assess, plan, do review cycle we set up in schools should not be set in stone. We may, for all sorts of reasons, need to review a child early. I've also delayed a review because I know the EP is coming in next week. And actually, I know that EP and I know I will actually get a report in 10 days. And I'm going to wait for that report before and phone the parent, say, I'm going to do their support plan in a bit late because, or, it's trying to then keep that within balance. You keep children within the cycle, but actually, be flexible. That child had a suspension. Let's review their support plan.
So the review is the end and then the start of the process.
Yes, because one of the things you need to feed into the review is the assessment. And it's almost an assess, plan, assess, do, assess, assess. You need the assessment at every element of the cycle.
And there's as you said, there's doing the assessment and then there's assessing the assessment. So what you've recorded is an assessment, but understanding it is that other assessment.
And simple things like, we have the thing, target was to read more common exception words. We've tested that, but can they apply it? And one of the things they're now able to do the 6 times table. Can they use their 6 times table? I really, frankly, don't care whether they can recite it. I want it to be useful.
So with the APDR cycle, this generally is paperwork. Is the minimum requirement for APDR paperwork 10 pages, 20 pages, or 30 pages? And I am taking the mickey here.
It is as short as you need or as long as you need. I would say for your average, I hate saying that, for most SEND support children who are making, we know what we're doing, probably you don't want more than 3 targets. Ideally, you want it on a page of A4. You want it quick and easy. For a child with an EHCP, a child where you're applying for an EHCP, you're going to need something longer. But how long does it need to be? It needs to be as long as it needs to be for the child, because it's appropriate for the child. Remembering, and if we start, and I think it's like school policies, where you get, I look at safeguarding policies, and some of the safeguarding policies I get sent, I've read novels. I've read novels by obscure Russian authors that are shorter than these policies. Nobody's going to read the whole thing. If we are getting to the point where it looks like a Russian novel, it is too long to be useful. If we are getting to the point where we're writing a summary document of it, it's probably too long to be useful.
It should be something quick and easy, key information, not every blow by blow.
And it needs to be clearly presented in a and I do think it is worth saying, what is it? Where has this come from? And if it's come from a particular assessment, or it's come from a particular report, linking that to saying, well, what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to try and achieve it? What are the actions? Simple. Bullet point. Short, not long extended narratives. And our review, and maybe a next steps. But keeping it really simple. Honest, the next review and the next steps are the same, and that then feeds into the next cycle. But keeping it as simple as you can manage.
As you mentioned, sometimes the APDR cycle is something you do in about 3 seconds within your head.
Yes.
So like, oh, I'm a bit thirsty. I've got a cup of tea. I've assessed. Oh, it's empty. I'll plan to make a cup of tea after we've recorded.
This maybe was suggesting we're coming to the end of the recording.
Coming towards the end. So when we think of APDR, there is the APDR cycle with the paperwork, but it is something you're doing again and again and again. There's no internet on my computer. Well, that lesson's out the window. We'll do this instead. That was an APDR cycle. It is constant. So when people get scared of it, that is as simple as it can be.
And it's like the sat-nav. It is not letting us be disempowered by the paperwork and not thinking it is written down, therefore I've got to do it. Actually, I know this in, the PE teacher who actually saying, what are the OT targets? How can I get those into my lesson? That's really relevant. And one of the things I would always do is if you're lucky enough to get an OT in and you have OT targets, make sure the PE staff know what they are. Because it's amazing what they can do to adapt their lessons to support those targets. And it's that whole thing, if we get it right for SEN children, we'll get it right for all our children. And actually most of those OT targets will benefit all our kids.
So the last bit I just want to end on is you see it come across lots on social media and various local authorities, is before you apply for an EHCP, there must be 3 cycles of APDR.
How long does a cycle? There's not, A, there's no legal requirement, but B, that cycle can be, and I have run, when I had children come into reception with clearly very, very high level of need, either nursery haven't responded to it or they haven't had nursery experience, I have run those 3 cycles within half a term. And I've made them really short, really tight, really small step targets. When we say 3, I think that we do need to do an assess plan. We do. Because on the other hand, I've seen children come into AP where the child has been sent to AP, excluded or suspended and moved somewhere, and there is no assess plan due. They have not identified the SEN, and it is SEN because the child needs something different and additional to AP. We need to have some assessment before that, rather than just that. That isn't your do. Their do is to send them to AP. Well, no, we need an assess plan before we do the do.
And I know the legal requirement is may need specialist provision, but part of that process is why are you saying they may? And then even just one APDR cycle where you are literally saying, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're doing. And if that doing gets really expensive and you know it's not working because actually we need to do more, and that is what the review says, that is quite a lot of information to help them make that assessment. It doesn't have to be 3. It doesn't have to be 1.
But it needs to be something. It needs to be an assess plan would do, not a knee-jerk reaction.
Yes.
And I think 3, to actually, certainly for prime for an EHP, till we've thought about it. We've tried something. I don't think, given the state of our SEN budget, that's unreasonable. What is unreasonable is when they're saying it needs to be termly. That can be really short.
Yeah.
But, and actually, for most cases, 6 weeks to say, actually, are we having an impact? Is probably not unreasonable.
But it doesn't have to be pages upon pages of paperwork. It can be, this is what we've identified, this is where we're going to put the support in, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we've actually managed to do.
And this is the bit that works and this is the bit that doesn't.
And the bit that doesn't is why we need to move on.
Yeah. And that may, but, we're professionals. We care about the children we work with. Let's make sure that we have gone through that thought process.
And to wrap it up to the beginning where I said that they see it as a burden because of this paperwork, because of these 3 cycles, the whole of the APDR cycle is there to help us with the process, identify what works, identify what doesn't work, do more of what works, and support that child.
And it becomes a burden when it becomes paperwork heavy and when it stops being fit for purpose. And it's about actually, how do we present it for your setting that works? You have a very IT savvy setting. Have it all on your SharePoint, and if you can put it so that it links to your class registers, whatever, brilliant. If you have a teaching assistant who really can't use internet, let's print it out. Let's get them to write on it. What's going to work for you? And that may not be universal across your setting. If you are going to take your children out into an intervention, this whole thing of in and out of interventions, into a space where there is no computer, don't expect the person there to then record their thoughts on a computer.
So just to wrap up, if you don't like the APDR cycle, if it kind of put shivers down your spine, if you think it's a waste of time, it's not. It's the way it's implemented in your school. It's the way you feel you've been made to do it. It's that sort of thing. It should be a really good process.
And if you're not working for you, go and discuss it with your SLT, and it's your whole SLT, not just your SENCO, because SEN is the responsibility of everybody in the school.
And another example of assess plan do review. Where did you go on a holiday last year?
Me?
Yeah.
Where did I go on holiday last year? Spain. Well, yes.
Where are you hoping to go this year?
I'm going to Eastern Europe.
Cool. And you're going to do that. And then you'll have a review and compare your Eastern Europe holiday to your Spanish holiday.
Yeah, and I'm doing group holidays with 2 different companies and comparing the experience of the group one. And then, so that will, I got my plan, I got my going to assessment, and then part of my review will be, if I'm planning another group holiday, which company do I go with?
And that's the thing, that is APDR. We use it everywhere in our lives. But again, the way it gets used in education, and the bad news always travels faster, it's turned into this horrible thing with fear. But it's a great thing.
And it needs to be.
And it's for the children, not for the paperwork.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
I love discussing APDR. It's something I get wound up with. An assessment, is it working below year 3? That's not assessment. That's a waste of everyone's time. It doesn't help the child, the parent, teacher, or anyone. It kind of hides things. You'll find Sarah's contact details in our show notes. We always share them. And you'll also find links to Sarah's book so you can have a read. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on our website. So thank you for listening to the show. If you want to get in touch, if you want to suggest a topic, let us know your thoughts or anything else, please send a message on social media. We're at a lot of them now. Or send an email to hello@thesencast.com. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared, and we help to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And we can help schools to show progress for a wide range of abilities and ages. We have a range of frameworks to suit students from birth all the way through to 25 with our Steps for Life framework that assesses functional academic skills, employability skills, and life skills. And for the most complex learners working within the engagement model, our engagement steps can build a profile of the student needs and show the progress they're making, however small. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Zencast. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.